All right, welcome to this week's Tech Insights webinar series. We're going to be talking this week about the Microsoft security platforms and how you can get the most out of your investment. We have some great guests this week. You may have recognized them from previous weeks talking about topics of security. First, my name is Nathan Lesnowski. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer, and with me is Chris Blackburn. Chris Blackburn is a Managing Architect with Concurrency out in Minnesota. Welcome again, Chris.
Good morning.
Awesome. And then also Laura Spence. Laura's out of Wisconsin. She's a technical architect and she's a rock star. Welcome again, Laura.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
All right. So today we're going to be talking about Microsoft Security Solutions. We'll be talking about how you get the most out of your investment. We'll start with the big picture, understanding how this all fits together. We'll then dive into the attack chain that most companies are experiencing and how the Microsoft security capabilities allow us to mitigate gaps within that attack chain. And then we'll end with a little bit of conversation about data center controls. Hopefully the attack never gets that far, but we have to practice defense in depth, and we'll be talking about that conversation as well. And then, of course, make sure not to miss an upcoming webinar that we're doing on June 24th, tied to the top 10 lessons that I've learned from countless cloud migrations. We are right at the top of the bell curve of companies migrating to Azure, and there's a lot of lessons learned from those early adopters of moving their data centers to the cloud. Great opportunity for you to learn a little bit about what those lessons learned were and how you can accelerate your migration in a way that serves your business well. So to start off today, for anybody who's been on a conversation that we've had about Microsoft security solutions or security in general, you're going to recognize this term, and it's zero trust. And the reason why we want to start off with this is because we want you to understand this within the context of how the Microsoft security solutions and how we are approaching security differently than the way you might have thought about this over the last, say, 20 years. So when we think about customers that are undergoing compromises or undergoing attacks or threats from the outside, there's two primary types of threats that we're seeing customers come to us with. The first type of threat is ransomware. We're seeing the impact of that everywhere. We're seeing it on the pipeline. We're seeing it on the meat supply. We're seeing it on major hosters. Organizations that you never thought would be taken advantage of or being taken advantage of being ransomware. It's really just a matter of time in terms of some of these older infrastructures being compromised by ransomware and being able to move within the environment. It also is complemented by targeted attacks where persons are trying to take advantage of particular types of data. They want information from a database, an ordering platform, an application that allows for an engagement with B2B, where they're getting information from other customers or partners of yours. They're trying to use that target attack to get something from you so they can either profit from it or they can take advantage of you in a different way. Oftentimes that's covered by ransomware to cover their tracks as they're leaving the account. So a lot of threats are happening within these two domains. So why are they so easy? Why are they happening so frequently? The reason it's so frequent is because of lateral movement. Lateral movement says that when something is compromised, I can move within this environment to other places within the environment relatively easily. People have spent a lot of energy on firewalls and external security, but then once you get inside the environment, it's pretty free reign. I'm able to move around it pretty effectively and be able to get to where I want to go. This is one of the reasons why so many ransomware attacks are being successful right now, is because of the ability to move within the environment. So what you're seeing is the new security strategy is oriented around the idea of zero trust. Zero trust is about the idea of taking devices and assuming that they've been compromised. And thinking about that idea that this device has been compromised, what do I need to do to prevent that compromised device from being able to compromise the rest of my network? Fine, I'm going to have a device that gets compromised. It happens. But how do I take that device and now prevent it from being able to compromise other things? That is what many of the tools we're going to talk about today are oriented around. And it combines three different qualities. The first is qualities around conditional access, the idea that where I am going to go, I need to have checks before I can go there. If my device has been compromised, something should be saying I can't go somewhere with that device or with that user because I'm failing certain conditions. And then we're also combining that with the idea of modern desktop. Modern desktop is this idea of my device isn't on the CorpNet. It's never on the CorpNet. It can't VPN into the CorpNet. It can't live on the CorpNet. It is completely off the CorpNet, and it functions as a device that lives on its own little island. And that is then combined with the idea of microsegmentation in the data center, oftentimes something that happens with migrations to the cloud. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on that third topic today, but we will talk about it in the upcoming webinar on June 24th about migrating to the cloud and lessons learned. So these three ideas factor into the tools we're going to be talking about today from the Microsoft ecosystem, and they also relate into some of the blocking and tackling that happens along logging, monitoring, and reporting. So let's dive into that. So Chris, Laura, what does the Microsoft Securities Platform include? Maybe we start with this graphic here and start to break down the different elements of it before we go into more detail.
Certainly. So as we work with our customers here at Concurrency and we talk about security, we really align to that Microsoft Zero Trust strategy. And within that Zero Trust strategy, there are 6 key technology areas. So if you look at the top left, it's identities. We're protecting those identities, what people use to authenticate. We're also looking at the devices that they're connecting on, making sure that they're secured, and we're understanding the security plane that those are utilizing. And then as we start to move inside of the network, which is where that security enforcement really starts to occur, we're ensuring that we're protecting things like our corporate data. We are protecting our applications that is critical to running our businesses, and to that those applications and that data run on top of is infrastructure, whether that's in the data center or whether that is in the cloud. Both of those need to be protected, and the networks that those sit on top of are protected as well. And all those come into the center with the Microsoft security picture of continuous security policy enforcement, where we're also using threat intelligence, where we're using policies. All this is an ongoing cycle to ensure that these 6 key technology areas are protected. And if we look at those 6 key technology areas, as we look at the Microsoft stack of solutions that they use to secure this picture in that E3 or the E5 stack, either one, we then look at 4 key security domains. It's identity and access management, it's information protection, it's threat protection, and it's security management. So as we look at the E3 stack, there are a lot of those core services that are already provided, such as Azure Active Directory. We start to look at things like data loss protection, Defender antivirus at the core on your workstations, as well as being able to look at that overall story of security management through things like SecureScore, through Security Center, through Compliance Center, and a number of other technology components that exist within those Microsoft Office 365 core compliances, productivity, and analytics stacks. Those are all part of that MIM 365 E3. Where we take that step further into the E5 stack are things that are more continuous as part of that ongoing threat intelligence cycle, such as Azure Active Directory P2, where we have identity protection, where it's automatically and ongoing looking at user behaviors. We're looking at things like Azure Information Protection and Cloud App Security, where we're doing continuous enforcement of our data protection. We're doing the threat protection. We're continuously looking at any threats on our workstations through Defender for Endpoint, as well as that Defender for Identity story that extends out as part of Azure Active Directory P2. It also extends its way onto your on-premise to look at behaviors that happen in your local network, that happen in your local data center, through your local file shares. All of those traditional resources that do not live in the cloud yet is where that Defender for Identity story is told. And then security management, we continue that story with things like Compliance Manager and Security Center, tying in each of the components that we saw here above within that E5 stack. So we are taking that security story that Microsoft begins to tell in E3 as part of that EMS stack, and then we really take it to the extended limits in E5 to ensure that we have the most protection with that Defender for Endpoint suite. And so now as we look at those 4 core domains that we talked about across identity, across information, threats, and security management, we can see here what technologies are built in natively to that Microsoft E5 story. A lot of these you've probably seen before, and a lot of you're probably familiar with, from MFA, from PAM, DLP, and data classification, some of the cloud app security brokers as we look at the application protection. And then deeper into that stack through threat protection, through things like the EDR capabilities we see in a lot of current day device protection and antiviruses, to intrusion protection, browser protection, and then kind of the wrapper that sits on top of it with that logging, monitoring, and reporting story. We have security scoring as well as reporting. So all these are included within that E5 story. And if we were to then take a step further into the Microsoft stack and we look into other solutions, such as what's included in Azure, such as Azure Sentinel, Azure Defender, we can see some capabilities that continue to protect our identities, that provide that additional encryption and backup of our data, that are looking at threats within our workloads in the data center, as well as being able to provide some of that cloud-based management. And then with all of these Microsoft tools, you need someone that's familiar with them, someone that's apprised of them, and a lot of these are covered through managed security service providers today that are able to provide some of those protection capabilities and being able to do some additional value-added services such as pen testing and asset discovery, as well as being able to provide things like managed SOCs and security training. So all these kind of live within the Microsoft realm today. They exist within that ecosystem of security providers. And then to extend even further through things like Sentinel, we can then now look at any sort of activity that happens with our VPNs, things that happen with our firewalls and our SIEMs, and even be able to integrate into our incident ticketing systems through things like ServiceNow, where we take all this data, we have a lot of these reports, and we have that incident response system that can automatically take actions for us and can automatically keep our security teams alerted when any sort of activities occur. And to look at the whole security story, there are still a few gaps, but there are very few in these instances where there are additional third-party providers and solutions that can help us look at things like host intrusion prevention, any sort of network analysis, any anti-subversion and deception software. But from a perspective of looking at user behaviors and activities that happen within some of these stacks, Microsoft gives us that at least visibility to see what actions are occurring. And so as we look at that Microsoft security stack, we talked about Microsoft 365 E5. A lot of the security tools that exist within that stack are part of that Microsoft Defender story, such as the Defender for Endpoint, which was previously Defender ATP, Defender for Office 365. We also have the Defender for Identity, as well as a Cloud App Security. All of these take advantage of artificial intelligence to look at how user behaviors are occurring. It also allows us to take advantage of that AI to really leverage self-healing technologies to automate a lot of the remediation, to where our security teams, our SecOps teams can focus on what is really important and allow that AI to take that first stab at trying to remediate any sort of security activities that might occur.
Awesome. All right, so Laura, Chris, why don't we talk a little bit about the attack chain, walk through that attack chain, and then highlight where different tools would be used in that attack chain to mitigate the movement.
Yeah. So walking through this, first and foremost, Chris, you hit on, the key points between E3 and E5, and definitely the benefit there at the end I heard you say was the automation of, remediation and offloading some of that workload from SOC teams. So as we, look here at a full attack, we'll go from the initial access to walking through all the way a domain controller being compromised. So in here, an email is going to come in to a mailbox, and the user ultimately will probably see that. and go ahead and click on that. So then when that user clicks on that, document perhaps is downloaded, has a malicious link in it, or there's a malicious link in the email, and it starts to execute some commands on that computer to start doing some recon. So when we tie this back to, how can the Microsoft Defender suite help? Well, within here, we have Defender for Office 365. And when we talk through the difference between E3 and E5, the E5 is going to give you that automation response. So you're going to have things like Zap, that 0-day auto purge. So by chance, if something does make it through to an inbox and the user hasn't seen it yet, Microsoft's going to go in and see that when signatures are updated and actually pull that out. So here, walking through this scenario, you can see here that this tool, Defender for Office 365, can help mitigate it really from the start. But what's really nice about this is you compound that with Defender for Endpoint. So let's say you have some anti-spam and anti-malware solutions, and you have another AV on endpoints. Here, tying this in under the Defender umbrella, you're going to leverage some of the reporting capabilities. Microsoft's seeing that these incidents, it ties an incident report together. So these alerts are tied together, and it's going to start to draw some conclusions. So as that remote code is running on an endpoint, Defender for Endpoint is going to come in and hopefully remove that. I've done some testing on my system, and when I'm trying to test, I can't even test because Defender for Endpoint's removing it before I get there. So this walking through the scenario again, we have this malicious code running, and it's going to start doing that recon on an endpoint and looking for credentials of someone else. At this point, Barbara's account is compromised in this example. So we have that localized compromise now where Barbara's account's been compromised, there's a privileged account on this computer that's been compromised, and everything's localized here. So at this point, where we can come in then with some additional tooling is we're going to rely on that risk-based conditional access that E5 gives you. So Nathan touched on this early on is if there's a compromised account or some risk in an account, Microsoft's going to see that and start weighting that account or even that device with Defender for Endpoint. And it's going to see that either it's a medium or high risk and either require some additional access, authentication through the MFA app, or if your settings are configured such, if it's a high risk and it's seeing all of these alerts as we're moving through this scenario here, it's going to flag that as high and completely block that account there. So everything's localized, touching on that zero trust principle that Nathan had mentioned, and not using VPN. So going VPN-less, nothing's connecting back directly to the network. So we can tell the system you can't connect to the network, period. You can't access any applications or that. But in this scenario, unfortunately, we don't have that. So going through here, we have that lateral movement that was touched on. And this is where things get really dicey in your environment, where things can get really ugly really fast. Because now we go from one computer that's compromised to, in this example here, Roberto's computer, who's a systems administrator in your environment and has access to these domain controllers. And because there's that connection through VPN and that access there, and perhaps something like risk-based conditional access is not being leveraged, that attacker just won the jackpot there, and they have access now to your domain controller, the identities, and further, lateral movement can happen, and you just end up with that really bad sprawl that unfortunately we're seeing in the news these days. Mm-hmm. So what we can do is we can leverage that Defender for Identity component and Defender for Endpoint, both on that local system, how Chris was talking about, where we can extend those capabilities and really take a look at all of the identities on that domain controller that might be local, so maybe they're not in the cloud, but there's that AI that's building in the back end to see what those habits are. So if there's something that looks suspicious, we can shut it down really quickly.
Awesome. So let's break this down into some examples.
Yeah. So on the back end, when we talk through how does this eliminate, the SOC effort that's needed? Well, we have this Microsoft 365 Security Center. Recently, it's been really new. So your tenant, if you click on Security Day today, you might not go to this, but you can go to security.microsoft.com and you receive this dashboard, and it's going to tie all of those alerts together. So whether it be that email alert that happened, that device threat that happened, an identity alert that was triggered, everything's going to be all centralized. So it's going to be really easy and cohesive for your SOC team to take a look at those incident reports here. So in here, when everything is tied together as an incident, so this is what it looks like on that security center here. We have the summary of this incident that we walked through, and we're going to see that multiple devices were impacted, multiple users were impacted, potentially multiple mailboxes were even impacted as that threat came in, and you're going to see a timeline of how it came through. So you can really see how it sprawled, where you need to go and take a look and track that progress of the remediation that's happening. So whether that you have that E5 capability where you're automating some of this, or you have to go in manually and start to do things, you're going to have that holistic view here. Then you can dive in a little bit more in those incidents and in those alerts. So here we have that example from Barbara. She was compromised, it came in. We're going to see Barbara's activities. So again, we know where else to look, do some more remediation, analysis, find out what other devices she might be using. And maybe, you know, she hasn't logged on to there yet to compromise those, but we're going to be able to take a look at that and take some proactive, at this point, some proactive steps. So when we're in here and something has happened in the security center, you can go under hunting and you're going to be able to see those processes that Defender for Endpoint was capturing. So you're going to be able to do some analysis on that. And then when you're taking a look at the history and these alerts here, you're going to get a flyout screen and you're going to see what the automated investigation details were. So you'll see, is it remediated? Do you have to take some action on it? What are the recommended actions to take? You're going to have a full description as well, and then tying that back to, you can see there the full incident of where that alert was tied to see what else came from that event.
I feel like one of the things I'm really getting from this is just the interrelationship between tools. You know, so many security environments, they have a tool for this and then a different tool for this and a different tool for that, and nothing talks to each other. So they rely upon a ServiceNow or something to take all that information and try to aggregate it, but doesn't let them act fast enough. This is allowing all the tools to act together to be able to mitigate events before we even necessarily need to do anything.
Exactly. You're going to take all of these disjointed systems or things that need to, connect over, API or otherwise, be configured to work with one another. And you're going to have this suite of tools that natively works together and allows you to take that proactive measure or allow AI to take care of it for you.
And this is where we take that traditional concept of SIEM and data and all the data being collected and really add on the concept of SOAR, which is that orchestration and automated response. We see a lot of that here within the Microsoft Defender stack, and allows us to essentially let that platform do a lot of the big thinking and heavy lifting for us and just give us the information that it thinks has that biggest area of risk that we need to take action against.
Yeah, and I think, when I talk to a lot of clients, I'm always being asked, what are the recommendations? What are the best practices to take? Well, Microsoft's giving your security team that access right here in these portals with it. It's telling you on these flyouts, here's the recommendations. Here's what we would do, or here's what we have done. So then your team can also get that learning moving forward if, by chance, it's not automatically caught.
And this is just part of the Microsoft tool set. So what we just looked at here was really a part of the Microsoft 365 stack. So what happens now when we start to go deeper into the data center and deeper into some of our infrastructure, and we look at some of the other Microsoft security solutions that are a part of that? One of those that we look at right off the bat here is Azure Defender. So Azure Defender allows us to take some of those same protective capabilities that we talked about within our workstations in our Office 365 environment and extend it to our servers so they can be proactive in monitoring, into our IoT environment so they can also be protected, as well as looking at any sort of databases or any sort of PaaS solutions. Azure Defender also takes that XDR capabilities to look at all of those workloads and provide threat protection capabilities, and also gives us a very similar look at Security Center, but here in this next slide we'll look at is that Azure Security Center. So it's going to give us those same recommendations, that same point of view where it sees risks across our infrastructure and gives us areas where we continue to tighten these controls and provide additional security enhancements to our infrastructure.
A lot of those examples, they have that one-click remediation too.
Exactly. Microsoft within the Azure side, since a lot of it is their infrastructure, they make it easy to click through and meet those best practices very easily. And then on top of the data center protection, we also get Sentinel. This allows us to really extend our monitoring and our visibility of our environment that exists outside of the cloud, that exists outside of the Microsoft environment, extends to our firewalls, our security tools, our networks, any sort of native SIEMs, and allows us to bring that data into the Microsoft cloud and utilize that AI and that XDR capabilities so we can look at that security data across the enterprise.
I think where this comes in too is where, it's showing everything, it's building on where all of those Defender for Office 365 and all of that was, being built out in the Security Center. It's bringing everything all into one interface. So it's taking that on-prem, it's taking your cloud native security solutions and bringing it all in and allowing you to build out those playbooks to fit your custom needs with a lot of the native integrations there.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So you can see here in this sprawl, when you're in Sentinel and you're taking a look at the incidents, it's pulling everything from Zscaler to where an email came in, and it's showing you how everything all tied together and exactly where it all went to allow you to follow through. And you can see the flyouts there where it's matching traffic, so it's pulling those logs, and then you can customize those playbooks within Sentinel and fit your needs with any action. So whether you're shutting down access for the specific user, you're shutting down access for that endpoint, it's tying all of those Defender for Office 365 and Defender for endpoint and identity, it's tying all of that together here. So you're going to have those really rich insights within Sentinel there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Wow. So in terms of an overview, that really hit a lot of content. Really appreciative. Really great job, Chris and Laura. So what we would love to do is we would love to take this conversation into a deep dive with you as a one-on-one to talk about Zero Trust and Microsoft Security Solutions. We're finding that this is one of the most frequent conversations we're having with customers right now. Security is at the top of mind for organizations. It's a really relevant topic to the leaders of your organization. And you will need to know how you can take advantage of the current licensing you already have and maybe other capabilities that you can have in order to be able to better secure your organization. There's workshops that Microsoft pays for us to be able to do for you. And we're happy to bring this to you as a one-on-one, either virtually or in person in some cases, for us to start talking about these use cases. Open up the box, figure it out, determine how we can make it better. We want to take action on this subject with you. So by all means, reach out. When you close this webinar today, you are going to get a form that asks about us following up with you to talk about this topic. Engage Chris, engage Laura in a conversation with your organization to meet one-on-one and figure out how you could take advantage of the Microsoft Security Solution Stack better than you are today. Also, don't forget about our session coming up on June 24th. It's a great interlink into this conversation. When you're trying to secure an organization, one of the best things you do is you implement zero trust concepts. Many of those concepts that we talked about today, taking devices off the network, implementing the Microsoft Security Suite across those devices. One of the things we'll talk about in the top 10 lessons learned from countless cloud migrations is how do we use the migration to the cloud to be able to better secure our environment? It's a great point in time for us to move from where we are today into a different model of how we operate our cloud environment, especially in the context of security. So don't miss that conversation next week. It's just as relevant to security as the conversation we had is. And there's so many lessons learned surrounding the security story that match into the migration to the cloud. So don't miss it. We'll be talking about it in 2 weeks, and looking forward to having that conversation with you as well. Of course, certainly find all the old webinars and other content that relates to this, such as Zero Trust, on our blog and videos that are available today. And definitely reach out to us for that one-on-one conversation for us to talk Zero Trust and Microsoft Security Solutions. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.